All right. Good evening, everyone. Let us jump into Daf Ayin Beis and Kesubos. Ayin Beis and Kesubos. We have the famous Mishnah that talks about the various types of women that leave the marriage without a ksuva. Okay. Says the Mishnah, the following women have to leave the marriage, and they don't get the benefit which they usually get after a divorce, right? Here they don't get the benefit of the ksuva money. And there's two categories. One category is Ha'overes al das Moshe v'Yehudis. One is they did something that is called Das Moshe, which is more of a explicit deoraisa, a Torah prohibition, and one is called Das Yehudis. It's not exactly forbidden, but it was taken as a minhag that the women would do, and she did not do as most of the women did. So it's a lesser level, but still it's called Das Yehudis. And the Mishnah gives examples about something serious. And one of the examples of something less serious, Das Yehudis, skip a few lines. So the Mishnah talks about Yotze Verosha Parua, woman who goes outside without her head covered, or Toval Bashuk, she does sewing or needlework in the shuk, she likes to talk, she likes to yenta a lot. Okay, there's other opinions. She doesn't behave well. She screams. Okay, various traits that are not looked upon highly, and she leaves. So I was thinking to talk about the head covering. Then I said, nah, it's a very trite topic, and I'm sure everybody's heard of it. And unfortunately, it's a serious topic, and I don't know if we won't want to hear it again. So I said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. Although I just want to point out one thing and one of the reasons is that it's pretty much accepted that you have to cover your hair on some level. All right, that's kind of after you sift through the hours and hours worth of rabbinic literature on this topic. 95% of the opinions say that on some level, married women and even widows, believe it or not. Rav Moshe has a whole discussion about widows. We're not going to get into, but they have to cover their hair on some level. But just to end, we didn't even start, but I'll end on one point I happened to see from the writings of Rav Yosef Meisas. Okay, he is a Moroccan rabbi. We always have Moroccans here at some point. He lived contemporarily. He died only 1974. He was actually the chief rabbi of Haifa in the 50s and 60s, and he was actually known as a very lenient rabbi. They called him Yosef Hamatir. That was his nickname. I read and I found out. All these, the rabbis in Israel did not have a high opinion of him because he was too lenient. And one of his views was that women don't have to do it for the reason, because the whole reason why they started it was just a minhag. He basically says that it wasn't the hair itself, but it was the custom of the women back then to cover their hair, to cover their head, which was thought at that time that was called modest, right? I mean, a lot of this topic, I'm not really explaining it well because I don't want to talk about it. I'll tell you what I am going to talk about, but before I talk about that, I'll talk about what I'm not going to talk about. And a lot had to do with, well, what's considered modest or what's considered dress, and this topic dovetails into Kli Gever, and what if men wear pants and what if women wear pants, and there's all kinds of coinciding topics about who is there, who is the arbitrator of what is considered dress that the men have? What if you go to places where women only wear pants and the men wear skirts? Then what, right? What if you go to Scotland and men wear skirts over there? So obviously there's a lot to talk about, but he does say that because women a long time ago considered it modesty, and today they don't anymore. So being that they, or the majority, agree that it's not considered immodest to leave your hair open without a covering. So basically the prohibition does not exist anymore. So I just saw that. I've never seen that until the last couple of days. Again, I'm not telling anyone what to do. I just didn't want to talk about it more, because even though it's, probably the top 10 sugyas in Maseches Kesubos, but everybody's heard talks on it and read about it. And, and B, it's a very thorny topic. So that doesn't mean I stay away from thorny topics. I do that sometimes, but I wanted to talk about, rather than what a woman wears on her head, I wanted to flip it around and talk about what a man wears on his head. Okay, because that isn't talked about over here, right? You can't, right? If your husband doesn't want to wear his head covering, right? Does the woman leave the marriage with a ksuva? Can she force a divorce? Gemara doesn't talk about that. So the question is, well, everybody's worried about women covering their head. What about men covering their head? So on this topic, there happen to be 3 or 4, depending how you count it, major Gemaras that are scattered throughout Shas that bring down this very discussion. Okay, we'll start off with a very famous Gemara. It is from Kedushin Daf Lamed Aleph. If you're at home, Kedushin 31a. It's right in the middle of a very, very famous topic regarding honoring your parents and Kivrut Abaim. It's a very, very meaty few dafim over there on Chavtes, Lamed, Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis, if you remember from Kedushin, the first chapter. The Gemara over there says the following. Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, says Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Asur la'adam sheyahalech arba amos bekoma zakufa. The Gemara says that people or men should not walk more than 4 amos with a upright posture. It's basically a way of presenting yourself. People who walk, very proud with their shoulders back and their chest forward, give an impression, it's a very arrogant impression. And we try, in generally, not to be arrogant. It's frowned upon, right? This concept of gaiva. We all know how the Rambam talks about arrogance, and you should avoid it, right? It's one of the 2 things that you should be, right? That you should be a kitzoni when it comes to that, in kas, right? So the Gemara says you have to be careful not to present yourself as very arrogant. And it says a pasuk, Shenamar Molo Kol Haaretz Kvodo. And a pasuk in Yeshaya that we know, it says basically the whole world is full of his kavod, of Hashem's kavod. And if you walk around in an arrogant way, so you kind of like diss God, right? You don't show respect and regard. And therefore you kind of like bump God out of his place, like you're like showing him up. So you don't want to walk. And the Gemara, other places, says you have to walk with a little bend and looking down. Right? We had that, I think, class about a year ago. About I think in the Gemara Yuma discusses how you have to walk with your head down a little, looking at the floor. Right? You have to be modest. So that's how the Gemara in Kedushin starts. And it ends off by saying, Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua lo maski arba amos begilio harosh. So Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua, on a related topic of walking 4 amos, he says he would not go 4 amos with his head uncovered. Okay, why? Amar Shechina l'mala miroshi. He said because God is above my head. The Shechina is on top of my head or above me. So therefore, I have to act in respect. I have to show some kind of way of either, it's not exactly sure what the yarmulke does. Does it remind you that something's above you, or is it some kind of barrier, or whatever it is? The bottom line is it shows maybe that you're not the highest, that there's something above you, whatever it is. So that's really the source. Before we get to the story Gemaras, where it talks more on the agadic level, this is actually more on the halachic level of basically walking. Again, the Gemara is very clear. It's walking 4 amos, which is about, 6 feet, depending how you count an amma, a foot and a half, so 6-7 feet. You can't, which is basically two or three steps, depending on who's doing the walking, right? But either way, so you can walk a few steps without a yarmulke. So that's the Gemara, and just we'll look at the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch and what they have to say. The Rambam in his Mishnah Torah in Hilchos Deos, he says the following. I'm reading from Perek Hey, the 5th chapter of Hilchos Deos. Tznius gedola nohagin talmidei chachamim ba'atzma. He says the talmidei chachamim conduct themselves with a abundance of tzniut, privacy. Lo yitbazu, right? They shouldn't be mevaze, they shouldn't disgrace or degrade themselves. V'lo yizgalu roshan v'lo gufan, and they shouldn't uncover their head, and not their bodies. And then the Rambam goes on to say, then the Rambam goes on to say things that don't necessarily have to do with the yarmulke, but he goes on to say, and just how far we extend this concept of being modest, even when you go to the bathroom, right? You have to do it. I mean, I don't know if anyone here has learned the Maseches Brachos. I believe it's the 3rd perek. There's 2, 3, maybe 4 blots. I think it's the Chaf Aleph, Chaf Beis, where it talks all about rules of the bathroom. You're not allowed to talk, and you're not allowed to do this. You have to wipe yourself a certain way. You have to do this. You have to put your clothing on. There's many, many rules, believe it or not, about going to the bathroom, right? It just goes to show you how far our halacha extends to virtually every minute of our lives. We're governed by something. So that's an example. And the Rambam goes on and he talks about how you have to be a tsanua in the bathroom. So one of his examples is you have to wear a head covering, right? Very, very important. And then later on, the Rambam, regarding a completely different halacha, let me just find it. It's in the laws of Nesias Kapai. I'm sorry, the laws of did I not copy it? It's basically in the laws of davening Shmona Esrei. He also says how you should stand. We actually talked about this once a few months ago, and he brings down that you have to have your, here it is, Tikkun Malbushim. This is in Hilchas Tefillah in 5:5. He basically says, he talks about the importance of Shmona Esrei and all the rules and regulations, and he talks about how you should be dressed. So he says you have to be dressed a certain way. It should be your clothing should be adjusted and clean, right? And then he says, "V'lo yamod b'tefillah ba'pundaso," right? He can't stand in davening Shmona Esrei wearing his money belt, "V'lo b'rosh magula," and not with your head uncovered. So again, he repeats himself, obviously, because there's what we call tzvei dinim. We wear a yarmulke to show a certain respect for God, but then you have to cover your hair, meaning you have to cover your head, and you can't be a disgrace. Just like, for example, you can't. When you're davening, you have to be respectful. But that's not a law within us. That's a halacha regarding tefillah. Just like there's a halacha regarding tefillah, you can't daven next to a garbage can. You can't even daven next to a baby or holding a baby, which is a whole separate discussion, because everybody today, right, in shul, they hold their babies during Shemona Esrei, but because babies, they dirty their diaper, and there's all kinds of problems, believe it or not. Go ask your local rabbi. I'm not going to discuss it, But babies are a problem if you're next to a woman that has their hair uncovered, going back to the first discussion about hair uncovered. So there's certain laws of how to present yourself during davening. So that's why the Rambam mentions it, that you can't be a shlump when you daven. You can't daven in your pajamas, and you can't daven with grip clothing. Oh, and by the way, you have to have your head covered. So that's regarding davening per se. But the other Rambam in Hilchos Deos talks about the general makeup of a person, how he has to be tzanua and modest, and always have his head covered. So you see, the Rambam looks at it from both angles, both regarding us and both regarding Hilchos Tefillah. And if you look in the Shulchan Aruch discusses this way in the beginning. Literally, the second siman in the whole Orach Chaim. We're talking getting dressed. Again, we have rules about everything. Getting dressed, what shoe to put on first. Believe it or not, there's a law about you have to put your left shoe on before your right foot. And it says, by the way, so before you get out of bed, right, you got to put your yarmulke on. So it says, Asur le'elech b'kol zakufa. And generally, you can't walk with a upright posture. And you can't, I'm quoting now from the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, and you can't walk without your head covered. And you should make sure that you go to the bathroom earlier in the morning, right, before you do anything else. Okay? And then the Ramah says, you can't go out naked, right? When you go out of your bed, you have to cover your body, and you can't go yachaf, which is barefoot, right? A lot of people walk around barefoot. He says you can't do that either. Okay, and then the Ramah talks about going to the bathroom early and going to the bathroom late at night. Okay, we're not going to talk about bathroom habits, but again, we have everything. So the Shulchan Aruch lumps that together, okay, with your yarmulke. So the question is, so you're coming out of your bed, assuming your yarmulke isn't on, right? Meaning the assumption of the Shulchan Aruch is that you didn't sleep in your yarmulke. That's why you have to put it on when you get out of your bed. So I'm reading the Mishnah Brura. He says, first of all, what about this Dalet Amos, 6 feet? So could you walk 3 feet without a yarmulke? It sounds like you can. So the Mishnah Brura says, no. Umidas chasidus afilu pachas medalet amos. He says, the correct thing is that you shouldn't even move a millimeter without a yarmulke. Okay? Vafilu be'es hashina balayla. Wow. I don't know if anybody here goes to sleep wearing a yarmulke. I'm willing. Oh, okay. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. Okay, but here's the Mishnah Brura saying it. So if someone asks you if you have to do it, right? The non-Jews who make fun of us in our beanie caps, right? And they say, "Oh, do you even wear it to sleep?" You could quote him the Mishnah Brura, right? In Sif Yud Aleph, and that says basically, yeah, there are those people that wear it even to bed. All right, then he discusses whether this 4 amos is a real law or it's just a good suggestion. But anyways, then he brings in the Taz. Oh yeah, that reminds me, the Taz says something very interesting. The Taz says, if you look at the Gemara, it says you can't walk without a yarmulke. So what is everyone going to ask? Well, what if I'm not walking? What if I'm on an airplane? What if I'm on a train? Now, you could debate with Einstein whether you're really moving or not. Maybe we'll do that in a different class, whether a person's considered moving, right? If he's going 500 miles per hour on an airplane, but he's sitting in his seat, is he moving? Right? That's a metaphysical, right? That's a whole philosophical discussion. But regarding Jewish law, again, Jewish law has what to say about virtually everything. So the question is, do you have to wear a yarmulke if you're not moving? So believe it or not, the Taz deals with that. Let me read the Taz. He says, okay, the Taz 400 years ago didn't have airplanes. He had camels. He had donkeys. You're not moving technically. The donkey's moving. So the Taz was already mechaven to Einstein, right? And the physicists that discuss, are you really moving, right? If you're sitting on a train. So the Taz says you absolutely are. right? Or Yoshev Ba'agola in a wagon. He says that's Kamahalech. Why? Because the rule is, we say in the Maseches Kedushin, Rochev Kamahalech Dami. If I'm riding in a horse, it's as though I am in motion, even though I'm doing nothing and sitting still. So that's a very interesting thought that I'm sure you would enjoy for those who are wondering, well, what if you're not really walking? Okay, so we see basically that, it's kind of not really debated, and, pretty much everyone is in unison, commenting that this is a serious thing. And obviously we saw from the Gemara in Kiddushin what the reasons are, okay? Or what the reason is about always having the fear of God. And we're going to bring a story now. This is a very famous Gemara, and I think I brought down this Gemara. Let's see if Shmuel remembers. When I discussed the Gemara in Moed Katan at the end, where it talked about Mazel, right? Remember we had about 2 or 3 classes, and I kind of interwove this, whether Yesh Mazel be Yisrael, Ein Mazel be Yisrael, right? Abaya and Mazel, and is it up to us? Is it up to the way the planets revolve, go around the sun, and right, all kinds of Mazel related Gemaras. But the source of it is at the very, very end of Maseches Shabbos, one daf before the end, on 156b. The Gemara has a story about Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Okay, the discussion is whether there's mazel or not. So it says the Imed Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who we see a lot in the Gemara, his mother, Amri La Kaldoi. So his mother was told by the Kaldaim. Kaldaim were the astrologers or astronomers at the time. Okay, they knew how to read stars and predict the future and tell you a little bit about what's going to happen to you in your life. Okay, that was also part of the discussion we had about, if you try, is it up to you, right? So I think we mentioned this. So basically the stargazers told the mother of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Brich Ganavahave, your son in the future is going to be a Ganav. Wow, now this is Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, the famous Amora. So his mother got a little scared and nervous. So as a precaution, she did not let him go without his head covered. That's what she took out of this story, out of this warning from the stargazers. So Amrullah, she said, Kasei Reshach, this is a famous line, cover your head. Cover your head in order that you should have what we call Yira Shamayim, Ube'e Rachme. And when you do that, right, and you pray for mercy, cover your head, pray for mercy, and hopefully this will do away with that curse that the stargazers gave you of you being a Ganav. So the Gemara says, Lo hava yada amai kamrele. So the Gemara says that in truth, he didn't know why she said this to him. Meaning his mother never said, by the way, this is what's going to happen to you. If not, she just said, always wear a yarmulke, right? Like when you go to school, your mother says, keep your yarmulke on, right? So that's exactly how the story went. And Yom Echad, Yosef Kagaris Tusei Dikla, one day he was reading, right? Or he was sitting and studying by a tree, okay? And the tree was not in his yard, so it didn't belong to him. And Nafal Glima Me'iloi Reisha. And now they didn't have yarmulkes like we have today, per se. They had a head covering, they had a cloth, or they had a cloak, right? Like, like Saudi Arabia today or something like that. A towel. So the whole thing fell off of his head. And when it fell off his head, the Gemara said, Dale Eine Chaze Ladikla. He lifted his eyes. Oh, and he saw the palm tree that had the fruit on it. So he got all excited. So Alme Yitzre. So his Yetzer Hara burned up in him, right? And what did he want to do? Salik. And he wanted to climb up. He was about to climb up and take some of the Paskila Kiburi B'Shene, right? and he had he wanted to go and go and take the dates, right? So that's that's a problem. So what ended up happening was, let me just finish the rest. Hang on, my other half got cut off. 1 second. I'm sure you could all guess the end of the story. Sorry, 156p. Oh, I'm sorry. That's it. So Alma Yitzrei Solik Pasuk Kibur Bishini, right? He was about to steal, right? He was right. He had his yetzer, so he climbed up and he took the dates off with his teeth. So what do we see from this story? We see from the story, again, the topic isn't yarmulkes as much whether you're born, right? Mazel b'Yisrael means, are you born with a certain tendency, right? Remember how we talked about if you're born under a certain, right? If you're born under Mars, then you have a tendency to like blood, right? Remember that? We discussed that, and you could be a butcher for good, or you could be a murderer for bad, right? You like blood, but sometimes you could be a moil. It's a very successful business, but a murderer is not such a successful business. So the point of the story is, regarding that, he had an inclination to steal, but are you able to overcome? So his mother's insurance policy was basically wear your head covering, and voila, you'll be saved. So we see a real good bona fide reason why a head covering, at least in that story, would certainly be recommended. There's another similar Gemara, also from Masechet Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amud Beis. The Gemara is talking about various Amoraim, various rabbis that says that say, or that are they're extolling how great the reward is going to be because they each fulfilled a certain halacha. They all did something special, and they're kind of gloating about it, obviously, to tell you how important these things are. So one person says, it's great, I should get a big reward because I ate shalosh shudas every week on Shabbos. One person said, I get a great reward because I am a good, I take precaution in davening, I wear tefillin, I wear tzitzis. One of them is Teisi Li Delo, says Rav Huna Brid of Yeshua, Teisi Li Delo Sagina Arba Amo Gilu Rosh. So he basically knows the law. He says, I should be getting a great reward because I fulfilled my obligation of always covering my head. So now we know what the reason is based on the previous Gemara, how should there be something above you, but I want to read a Ben Yehoyada, and I'm just going to read it. I don't claim I understand the whole thing because we've had many Bnei Yehoyada, right, Shmuel? Is that the plural of Ben Yehoyada? Bnei Yehoyada? Or Ben Yehoyadas? Okay, whatever it is, it's not important. But we've had many Ben Yehoyadas, and we know that he's very mystical, and he brings all these various, Zohar-like and very obscure references. But I'm just going to read it. I found it very interesting, and he brings up a good point at the end. So I'm going to read it. He says, Niruli hatam lazarazu, milvad tam hayadua. He says, I'm going to tell you the reason why we have to wear a yarmulke, why we have to wear a head covering, aside from the reason that we already know, i.e., which is the Gemara in Kiddushin about always having something above your head to remember God. So he's hine yesh ruchos raos meshotetin ba'avir ha'olam. Says the Ben Yehoyada, there are all kinds of ruchos raos, which basically mean evil spirits, are the word meshotetin. It literally means to swim, that are all flying around the world. Okay, there's like negative energy, right? Today in today's yoga lingo, that's what they would call it, right? There's all kinds of negative energy and garbage flying around the world, right? You want to be positive. Now, where does all this negative energy emanate from? So he says it comes from the Nachash, right? Remember Mr. Snake who seduced Chava and basically brought, hell to the world. So it comes from the Nachash. And he's responsible for the ayin hara that we get from other people when we look a certain way. There's some, and again, I don't pretend I know what I'm talking about. I'm just reading it because it's always interesting to even if we don't truly understand what it means, to simpleton like me and you, on some level, let's just try to understand it. So he equates it to there's an ayin hara that goes around when you look, and it comes from the side where the nachash comes from. The hanachash haya arum, lachen kasher roen guf arum bli kisui. So what happens now? So let's get to our topic. So when you see a body without clothes, okay, or a head uncovered, right? Umalbushim nimshachim acharav umitachzin bo yoter. We kind of get attracted to it. Va'az memela matilin aras shel ayin hara bo umazikin oso. When we look at something, I mean, we've all heard this expression of ayin hara, like don't give me an ayin hara. Like I'm going to try out for something. Don't give me an ayin hara, right? Don't give me an evil eye and tell me, take it. Just don't look at me, right? Like everyone has ayin haras that have superstitions, right? Whatever it is. So he says that's why when you look at someone, meaning for too long, you give them an ayin hara, and when there's something not on them or that they're lacking, that would be a reason for you to stare at them. Because we are attracted to things that we could relate to. And what is it that attracts you to someone else? What's the first thing you look at? Right? You look at something that's your eye level, right? And if that person is not wearing any clothing, then you would follow him, and you become damaged from their ayin hara. So that's why because 4 amos is considered a substantial amount. So therefore, when you're quote unquote naked, when your head isn't covered, you attract people to gaze at you. If it's covered, then they're not really going to gaze at you. Now, it's hard to, really understand this in today's world of our yarmulkes, which are kind of small, some smaller than others, some bigger than others. So whatever it is, let's just take it for what it's worth. So ayin hara is the answer for the question why we wear yarmulke according to the Ben Yehoyada. Now he asks a great question, a question that everybody asks, but I doubt anyone really has seen this Ben Yehoyada. So he asked the question, he said, I don't understand something. Ayin hara is only for boys? What about girls? How come girls don't have to wear yarmulkes? How many times have you heard that in your life? Right? We've all heard that one time or another. Now some do. Most obviously don't. And it's certainly not mandatory. I'm not talking about a head covering. I'm talking about girls or women who aren't married yet. Why don't they have to cover their head? Nothing to do with tznius, because it's only if you're married. That's how the Torah defines tznius, right? By the sota, which is the source of the whole covering the hairs from the sota. Presumably she's married, so it only applies if you're married. If you're not married, you could have the beautifulest, whatever the word is, the nicest hair, right? The most attractive hair, but there's no prohibition, right? There's no inyan of covering it if you're not married. So the answer is why not? What about an ayin hara, right? How come they don't have to cover their hair? So says the Ben Yehoyada, Hinei nekevos shiny. Girls are exempt. Ki elu haruchos sheyesh behen aras shel ayin hara hen mesitra deduchra denachash hakadmoni shahaya zachar. So the answer is that if this whole thing stems from ayin hara, and the ayin hara stems from the nachash in our tradition was a male. Hence, the Gemara in Sota that says that he was attracted to Chava, right? Because men are attracted to women. right? At least then they were. And therefore you have a male and you have a woman. And being that the Nachash was a male, the whole concept of Ayin Hara comes from the Nachash, who was a male, therefore it doesn't apply to women. Okay, very, very interesting. So that answers the question. I mean, it doesn't really answer it because we don't understand it. So whatever level of understanding you understand this Ayin Hara, hopefully that answers the age-old question of how come girls don't have to do it. Okay, I just thought that would be very interesting for everyone to hear. There is actually another source about head covering in the Talmud. It actually comes from Maseches Kala. Okay, we've had a number of times, we've quoted from Masechtos Ketanos, right? What they call in English the minor tractates. They're found all the way at the end of Nezikin, like if you take out a Gemara Avodah Zarah, all the way in the back, you'll find there's various Masechtas on certain topics. And one of them is Maseches Kala. Okay, and I'm going to read a story from Maseches Kala. It's not a very well-known story, but it's interesting. It has to do with Rabbi Akiva. And we spoke about him at length a couple of weeks ago. So here's another best of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we're going to talk about people who are az panim. What they talk, as they say, someone is an azut panim, someone who's bold-faced, someone who has chutzpah, someone who's brazen, right? That's what's called an az panim. Okay, so if someone is very, very chutzpahdik, so Rabbi Eliezer Omer Mamzer, Rabbi Yeshua Omer Ben Hanida. So the Gemara, and we actually had this, if you remember, in Yevamos. I think in the Pays, it was, I forgot what daf already. It was Ayin Zayin, Ayin Ches, I think, somewhere around there. Not in Pays, I think it's Ayin Zayin and Ches, where it talks about how you could actually see, based on a person's demeanor, whether they were a mamzer or not, right? I don't know if you remember that. It was a couple of months ago in Daf Yomi. But anyway, so this Maseches Kala goes on that Gemara and says that if you are chutzpahdik and bold-faced and brazen, right? Rabbi Eliezer says, chances are you're a mamzer. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Ben Hanida, you were born when your mother was a nida, which is a no-no, right? You know the law. Rabbi Akiva Omer Mamzer Ubein Hanida. Rabbi Akiva says, Elu ve'elu, you're both. You're a mamzer and you're Ben Hanida. Wow, very interesting. That's pretty bad. That's like a double whammy. Okay. Pa machas hayu zakenim yoshin b'shar. So the Gemara relates a story. There was once a time where the zakenim were sitting at the gates. The avru lifnehen shtei tinokos. Two young boys were passed in front of them. Echad kisei es rosho ve'echad gile es rosho. One passed them by wearing a head covering, and one passed them by without wearing a head covering. Zesha gilu et rosho. So the chachamim over there basically talked amongst themselves and said, well, the one who's not wearing his head covering, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Mamzer, Rabbi Yeshua Omer Ben Hanida. So Rabbi Eliezer said, just like we said a minute ago, he's a Mamzer. Rabbi Yeshua says he's a Ben Nida, and Rabbi Akiva Omer Mamzer U Ben Hanida. He's a combination. So Amru Lola Rabbi Akiva. So they said, Rabbi Akiva, you are like, what are the chances? Right? You know, it's like this math game, right? Let's say there's 2% mamzerus and 1% of a nida. Here you are, you're hitting the trifecta. Well, only two, but it's like 0.0002%. If you do the math, the chances of being both are there, right? It's 2% of 1%. Very, very, very low. So they said, Rabbi Akiva, just because the kid wasn't wearing a yarmulke, how do you know that he in fact is this and a mamzer? And the expression is basically, how did your heart tell you to contradict the opinion of your colleagues who are sitting next to you? So Amr Lahen Aniya Kaimena. So Rabbi Akiva said, don't ask me a question, I'll prove it. So how did Rabbi Akiva prove it? So Amrullah, so the story goes on. I don't think anyone has ever heard the story before. It's not a very popular story. So halach etz imel tina. So Rabbi Akiva found the mother of this boy who wasn't wearing a yarmulke. She was in the shuk selling kitniot, not on Pesach, just regular kitniot. Okay, beans. Amar la, so he said, Biti, im ata umeret li davar sha'ani sho'elach. If you're going to answer the following question I'm going to ask you, ani miveach alachai olam haba. Guaranteed to have olam haba. Right? Amar la, she said, Hishaveli, swear to me that it's true. Swear to me that I really get olam haba. So Haya Rabbi Akiva nishba b'svasav. Rabbi Akiva swore, but umavato belibo. He swore it verbally, but in his heart, he nullified the promise, which is a whole separate discussion. How did Rabbi Akiva do something that sounds like out of whack, right? You're promising her something, but you don't really mean it. Okay, side discussion. But anyways, because how could he promise someone olam haba? He just wanted to get the answer out of her that he was about to ask her. Right? Very interesting stories on many levels. So we say now, so what was this question that he was going to ask her? So Amarla bin Chazeh Mativo, what this son that I saw earlier today, what exactly is his nature? Like, what's the status of him? So Amrullah, she said, it's funny you ask. When I went to get married, Shmuel, you ready for this? It's a great story. When I went to get married to the chuppah, Nida Hayiti. I was a Nida. Whoa, sounds like Rabbi Akiva is onto something. Upirish Mimenu Bali. So what's the halacha, right? Chuppah's Nida is a whole discussion. We had this in the first parak. What do you do? The Rambam, right? Whatever it is, without getting into the specifics. They didn't consummate the marriage, right? He took a day off because she was a Nida. Uba Elai Shushbini. The best man came and basically slept with me. V'hayali ben, and I had a son. Zeh nimtza hatinok mam zeru ben hanida. Rabbi Akiva was right. Okay, so she basically admitted that, right? It was a 2-for-1. So Amru Gadol Hayu Rabbi Akiva Shehikchesh Es Rabosav. So it was declared that Rabbi Akiva, he was a great man because he contradicted his Rabosav, right? He argued on them. And it says, Ba'osa Shah Amar Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael Shagila Sodu Rabbi Akiva and Yosef. And at that same time, they said, bless Hashem, who revealed his secret to Akiva ben Yosef. Okay, great story. What do we see from here? We see from here that, again, the just not wearing a yarmulke could show a lot about someone. So, I just wanted to end on that note. I'm not paskening, I'm not saying anything, what people do. Obviously, I think Rav Moshe was asked about taking yarmulke off at work in certain situations and not this and not that. I'm not here to talk about anything, contemporary problems of head covering and knots, but as usual, what I like to do is show you the foundation, where this whole thing comes from, what the rabbis had to say about it, and throw in a couple of interesting stories that at least we could remember one or two of them, if someone were to ask us. So that concludes the snippet on male head coverings. I wanted to transition on a unrelated topic to another piece of Agadata found on Daf Ayin Hey. There's a famous Gemara. Kesubos, obviously, by now is full of them, but this one is in the Zionist section. It's on 75a on the bottom. The Gemara talks about a Amora by the name of Rav Maisha bar Berei de Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Maisha, the grandson of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. I want to talk about Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. I think that's tomorrow's Gemara. This fascinating Agadata about Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. and what he achieved, and with the Malach HaMaves, there's awesome stories. I don't know if you did it tonight though, so I think you did. So therefore, I didn't want to talk about it because you did it about an hour ago. So since you are all experts on Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, I figured I'd talk about his grandson. So he actually made a comment regarding woman about a woman and whatever, not for now, but the Gemara connects it, as Gemara likes to do a lot, connects it to another statement that he made about a completely different topic. And the Gemara is about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. It says, Uletzion Yomar Ish Ve'ish Yulad Ba V'hu Yechaneneha Elyon. Okay, this is a pasuk in Tehillim. And the pasuk in Tehillim is saying, it's a very funny lashon. It basically says that regarding Tzion, which is Israel, it says, Ish, this man and another man, Yulad Ba, okay, who are born to Tzion, i.e. people who are born in Israel, V'hu Yechaneneha Elyon. Okay, they will be in the most, right, the most high, right, the Elyon, the high, Yechoneneha should be established in it. Basically, it's a verse saying the virtues of pretty much living in Israel or having a relationship with Tzion and Israel. But it says this man and this man were born in Tzion. So the Gemara is going to say that's a very funny thing to say 2 times the word Ish. So Amar of Maisha, we're a few lines before the Mishnah on 75a on the bottom. Amar of Maisha bar Braid Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Echad hanolad ba ve'echad hamitzapel lirosa. It's not just an Israeli. It's not just someone who made Aliyah, someone who lives in Israel. It's someone who yearns to see Tzion. You could be in Washington, but if your whole anticipation and everything you do is Tzion related, you work in APAC. I'm just kidding. You have desires to go to Israel. It means a lot to you. Everything you do is Israel, and you intend to get there. The Gemara says you're in the category of someone who actually lives there already. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. And Amar Abaya, and Abaya says, by the way, this should be taken. Okay, this concept of living in Israel is a serious topic. The Gemara says that one of us, now Abaya is in Bavel. He says one of us, right? He basically says that one Ben Eretz Yisrael is greater than 2 outside of Israel. Believe it or not. Okay? Is double. Living in Israel is double living outside, meaning 1 is greater than 2 living outside. That's the first statement. Amar Rava v'chad minayin kisa, and Rava, who also lived in Bavel, said, by the way, if you're not sold, I'll sell you even more. V'chad minan, and one of us in Bavel, kisalak lahasam, when we go to Eretz Yisrael, meaning we had the influence of Bavel, now we picked up and made Aliyah, now we live in Israel. Adif kitrei minayhu is actually when you go to Eretz Yisrael is superior to 2 people born in Israel. So if it's like an equation, right? Like in school, if A equals B and B equals C, right? So if 1 Bavel equals, if 2 Eretz Yisrael equals 1 Bavel, so that's like a factor of, it's 2 squared. So that original, so this person who made Aliyah is like 4 times greater than this 1 person in Bavel who didn't make Aliyah. Okay, that's just some math. But anyway, so what are we talking about over here? Like, are we just playing around with numbers? So the Gemara says, no, I'm going to give you an example of how people, when they go to Israel, they become greater. The Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Chiyav, because Rabbi Yirmiyah, we talked about him a couple of times, right? The Chiyav, when he was here in Bavel, Lo Hava Yada Ma'ikamu Rabbanan. When he was in class and in the Beis Medrash, he often got lost. He had no idea what was going on. Kisalak lahasam, when he made aliyah, he was so superior, he dissed the people where he came from. Kisalak lahasam karilan bavlai tipshai. He said, "Oh, those stupid Babylonians," right? He eclipsed what he was, and now he's the one much greater than the Babylonians himself, right, where he started. Okay, so basically that's the Gemara. On a simple level, right, as you can see, it's just talking about, I mean, the power, for lack of a better word, of Eretz Yisrael. I wanted to read just a few commentaries on this. We haven't talked about, at least I don't think, and actually the Gemara all the way at the end of Kesubos, Kuf Yud Aleph is the other famous Gemara about Eretz Yisrael and about how it's better to be a secular Jew living in Israel than an ultra-Orthodox Jew in New York, and all these various Gemaras that usually get misquoted and set out of context, but a lot of those kind of Gemaras are going to be found. We're going to see them in about 35 or 40 days from now. So that's something on the side. But I wanted to read the Marsha because the Marsha says the following. He says, what are we talking about over here? He says, "Uperish hapsukim nichbados medubar b'chutzion ma she'enken b'shar ayarot u'medinot v'amar shezehu da'chashivot shebo." What's the chashivot? What's the chashivas of Israel? Ki hinei azkir Rahav u'Bavel. He says, when I just talk about, other cities, sheken derech mi shemodia sheyakiro tokora et atzmo al shem iro. You say, when you want to introduce yourself, you say, "Hi, I'm Shmuel from Staten Island." Right? That's how you would introduce yourself if you're at a party and you want to know, who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do? So he says, "Hi, I'm Shmuel from Staten Island." What does Staten Island have to do with your life? Nothing, other than the fact that that's where you happen to be born, right? So you associate yourself with your hometown, right? There's nothing deep, right? That's what we do, meaning we have an affinity to where we're born. Could go in Ploni Bavli, Ploni Mitzri, Ploni Plishti, right? You are an American, right? And if you move out somewhere else in the world, you're an American, right? You're an expat, whatever you are, you consider yourself an American because you came from America. No matter where you live on earth, you're still an American, right? So now, says the Marsha, what's this Gemara talking about? What does Israel have an advantage over the rest of the world? When it comes to Tzion, Yomar Ishi Shagam She'enu Nolad Ba'nikra Al Shma. If you're yearning to Israel and you daven for it and you support Israel and you talk about it all the time and you go there and you spend money and you send your kids there and you just don't live there, right? You're what they call the armchair quarterback, right? You're rooting for Israel, but you're in New York, right? For whatever reason, you can't go there. But if you support it and you think about it, says the Marsha, you're an Israeli. It's as though you're born in Israel, even though you don't live there. Very beautiful words of the Marsha. And I saw a fascinating medrash. How are we doing on time? As usual, not too good. I'm going to say the medrash anyway. There's a medrash that talks about it. It's in Dvarim Rabbah. Okay, on the pasuk at the beginning of Veschanan, where Veschanan Hashem Elokim Atah Chilosa Laharos Asabdecha, Moshe is pleading with God, please let me see the promised land, right? He's davening, he's doing everything he can. And God says, no, you could look at it, but you can't go in. You ready for this medrash? Here it goes. So, Davar Acher, Amar Rab Levi, Amar Lefan Ribona Sholom, Atzmosav Shel Yosef Nichnasu La'aretz, Va'ani Eino Nichnas La'aretz. Moshe is pulling out all the stops. He's pleading and he's pulling all the possibilities to God and says, for heaven's sake, look at Yosef, right? He didn't make it, but they bought his bones, right? They're right? It says in the beginning of Bishalach that they brought Atzmos Yosef over, right, through the water. to go to Israel, right? Through the Midbar, right? They wanted to bring it out of Mitzrayim. How is it fair that the bones of Yosef are making it? The ani eno nichnas la'aretz, and I don't get to make it. So Amalo Kadosh Baruch Hu Misha Hoda Ba'artzo Nikbar Ba'artzo. Someone who is modeh, someone who recognizes and admits to where he comes from, excuse me, Nikbar Ba'artzo, he'll be buried in his land where he came from. Umishalo Hoda Ba'artzo Eno Nikbar Ba'artzo. Like that one. And someone who's not modeh, someone who doesn't tell the truth about where he comes from, he will not be zocha to be buried there. So what's going on? What does that mean? So now the Medrash explains. Yosef hoda ba'artzo min ayin. How do you know that Yosef admitted where he came from? It says, Ru'u hevi lanu ish mitzri. Remember the story in Vayeshev, right? Where she claimed that he slept with him, right? The whole story with Potiphara, right? And she says the words, look what happened. This guy attacked me. This person who came out of nowhere is an ish ivri, v'lo kafar. And he wasn't kofar, right? He didn't say anything to the contrary. He said, yes, ish ivri. Ella, right? He didn't kofar, he didn't deny it. Ella, he said, gunav gunavti me'eretz ha'ivrim. He even said where he came from. He said, yes, you called me an ivri, and I am an ivri. He didn't lie. He didn't say he came from somewhere else. He was happy. Meaning, ish ivri is like a derogatory term. He said, yes, that's me who you refer to as an ish ivri. Therefore, nikbar ba'artzo, shenemar v'es'atzmos Yosef v'shehelu b'nei Sodom Mitzrayim kavru b'Shechem, right? They eventually buried him in Shechem, right? In Kever Yosef. That was until a few years ago, if you remember. But anyway, Ad shelo hodata ba'artzecha einata nikbar ba'artzecha. You, Moshe, you weren't modeh where you came from. What does that mean? So now we have to use our imagination. Where was Moshe? So the story is Ketzad, Benos Yisro. Remember in Parsha Shmos, Benos Yisro said, Ish mitzri hitzilanu miyad haroim. Right? Remember the story? Moshe saved them by the well, and then they go to their father, Yisro, and Yisro says, what's going on? And the daughters say, you're never going to believe it. Right? There was a fight, there were shepherds, and some Egyptian saved us. V'hu shomea v'shotek. Moshe was silent and said nothing. What could he have said? Right? Now, the Meforash on this Medrash explains that even though Moshe was never an Ivri, meaning he was never in Israel, Canaan, so to speak, like Yosef, because Moshe was born in Mitzrayim. Nevertheless, they were still called Ivrim in Mitzrayim. Right? It says, like the pasuk in the beginning of Shmos says, "V'hinei shnei anashim ivrim nitzim." Right? So there was a term of Ivrim. So if Moshe could have said, he says, I'm not an Ish Mitzri, I'm an Ivri. I'm proud to be an Ivri. Rather, Moshe was silent. Lefichach lo nikbar ba'artzo. Therefore, he didn't merit, right, to be buried, right, in his land. So that's the difference between Moshe and, so what do we see from this? That, as the Marsha says, we're proud of our hometown. And it seems like Moshe wasn't proud of where he came from for whatever reason. So therefore he was shotek, and that goes to show the proof of the Marsha. I thought that was a very beautiful Marsha. I just want to end off and be my usual 5 minutes overtime with a Ritva. The Ritva says, a very beautiful Ritva. He says, what is this business about whether you live in Israel or whether you just yearn to be in Israel? What is so special about Israel? So these are the words of the Ritva, Uperush Avira Machkimle. Right? There's an expression, it's a Gemara in Baba Basra, Daf Kuf Nun Ches, that says that Rav Zera, when he moved to Eretz Yisrael, he was able to understand something he didn't know before regarding a law about a nachala, right, about inheritance. And the Gemara says, we see that when you go there, just the avir, the atmosphere, the air in Israel makes you wiser. Okay, this has been used over the centuries. It's called avira machtimle, v'zocha ba bi Yehoshua, V'hainu dehadar amar Abaye. That's why Abaye says that what? That why does 1 equal 2, right? Why is it that 1 Eretz Yisrael equals 2 Babylonians? Because there's a zechus, and therefore when you go, it doubles. Because nitnei lefisha yatsa mituma v'nichnas tachas kanfei hashchina, right? The Gam, he says, ki ka'adam kisha-adam lomed chutz limkomo, when you go outside of your zone, limkomo kovel limuda yoser u'matzliach lefisha enu mizbatel. When you go to Israel, why do our kids go to Israel and get brainwashed? What if they went to Lakewood or to Denver or to South Bend, Indiana? You could get brainwashed there also. I'm using brainwash in a humorous way, obviously. Why do we get more religious when we go to Israel? The answer is because there's something about Israel that just makes us more religious, that makes us smarter and wiser, and we're just naturally better off going to Israel. This is the source of the concept of go to Israel and learn. And the Ritva says it literally, word for word, right? He says, the Rav Yirmiyah wasn't as smart, as intellectual when he was in Bavel, right? Rav Yirmiyah, the Gemara says how he didn't understand things. Gemara Nida says that he asked questions just to make jokes. The Gemara in Bava Basra says, we had this a few months ago, actually about a year ago, about how he asked the question, remember, 1 foot on the 50-yard line, 1 foot on the other yard line. Remember, with a bird that's found within 50 amos, he asked very, what they would call in yeshiva a klutz kasha, right? And he got banished from the Beis HaMedrash. We'll talk about that some other time again. But anyways, so when he moved to Israel, it seems like everything was solved. Okay, so that seems to be the elixir, is to go to Eretz Yisrael. And there's, just want to end off, there's another beautiful hafla that I saw. The hafla says on our Gemara, he says, it's not just intellectually, he says, V'yeshli tentan bazeh sheha'ol Eretz Yisrael yachashav ke'shanam hanolden ba ki masha amar she'echad b'nei Eretz Yisrael hu kishnayim b'chutz la'aretz. Why is it that it's double? Hu machmas gram chet. Because there's more sin outside of Israel. So he says that's why, and he equates it to Makom Shabale Tshuva Omden Ein Tzadikim Gurim Yochol Lamu. He says just like Bale Tshuva get more reward than Tzadikim. Why? Because when a Baal Tshuva does Tshuva and repents, his sins flip to mitzvos. So he has the advantage of he has new mitzvos, plus all of his old sins are turned into mitzvos, whatever that means. V'hinei ba'ol eretz Yisrael, the same thing is true when you go to Israel. You're double. He's explaining why we have the ratio of 1 to 2. Because our chataim turn into zechuyos, turn into mitzvos. Al korchach adif k'trei minayu. Therefore, once you're there, you not only get more mitzvos, but your old sins revert, so everything doubles. So he equates that to the Baal Tshuva vis-a-vis the FFB, right? And he's equating it to the Ben Chutz La'aretz, to the person living in Israel, and that's a great note to end on, because I'll be going to Israel and I'm going to miss a couple of weeks. I just wanted to throw that in. So I think this is the last, right? Next Tuesday, right, night, we have this holiday coming up, I think, called Rosh Hashanah. And then we have Yom Kippur Tuesday night. Okay. And then Sukkot. And basically it's going to be a while. So I'll see you somewhere in the kufs, in the 100s. Maybe we'll pick